sometimes, like rain sometimes. Things that make your mind in red 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 sometimes. Oh, oh, yeah. And then we act like everything is alright. That's not what your true soul testify. The eyelid red sometime. The eyelids red sometime. Red sometimes. Red sometimes.
Yes, when we came out with The Great Mystery Philadelphia in 2018, we called it The Great Mystery because we said it's a mystery of mysteries. That if you know The Great Mystery Philadelphia, it helps you decipher most other mysteries of life, you know? And so we're going to use the lens that The Great Mystery Philadelphia affords us to look at, you know, what we see today, what the mystery of, are we seeing a plandemic? And we're going to use the lens of The Great Mystery Philadelphia to look at the yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia in 1793, you know, which, you know, the 2020 hindsight that we have in this year, you know what I'm saying? Hindsight is 2020, right? Well, we in 2020. And so the hindsight that is afforded us in this year of 2020, if we take these events that we're witnessing, the 1793 yellow fever epidemic with some 2020 hindsight, the clarity of vision is amazing. And we don't even have to go downtown, center city, where, you know, most of the towers of power and edifices and architecture that reveals the Great Mystery Philadelphia. We don't have to go down there. We're going to take a walk in my own neighborhood, historic Germantown, what they want to call Freedom's backyard. We're going to take a walk and just see what is encoded right here in a residential neighborhood. You know, you got 400 years of history right here affirming that Philadelphia is a museum without walls, and that the art, architecture, and archetype symbols throughout this city reveal amazing, mystic, historic roots of a lot of things that we see today. We're going to start right here, what them call Grumblethorpe. Grumblethorpe is the old big house of the Wister family, established by a man named Caspar Wistar. And these Wistars, they go by either Wister or Wistar, depending on which branch, but they're all one family. And Caspar Wister, the plant wisteria, is actually named after him. And he was a big man in pharmacology and anatomy at the University of Pennsylvania. You know, he basically helped transition what started out as Pennsylvania Hospital into the University of Pennsylvania. You know, he was a surgeon, professor of anatomy, pharmacology. He actually wrote the first book of chemistry that was published in the United States. Okay? Dr. Wistar was also one of the earliest advocates of vaccination in the United States. And as a matter of fact, in 1809, he formed a society that began the open promotion and advancement of vaccinations as a form of public health. So now we're going to take a walk across the street, almost directly across the street from Grumblethorpe. Here you have what is now a church, but in the days of Grumblethorpe, the first press of this community, okay, established by a man named Christopher Sauer, who had a printing press here and printed German/English newspapers, influencing the minds and the thoughts of the newly arriving German immigrants to the colony, you know? And he also published the first Bibles ever published in the United States. These was published right here by the man Christopher Sauer. And yeah, you can't help but wonder if the close relationship we see with pharmaceuticals have with the press, the historic roots of that don't lie right here. We keep walking We come up on place I really want us to focus in on. The events that occurred here during the yellow fever epidemic reveal that, yeah, man, this thing probably was a plandemic. That's the Dessler Morris House, also known as the Germantown White House. You know, history records that George Washington stayed here from November 16th through 30th in 1793, that he had to escape Philadelphia because of the yellow fever epidemic. I know many are thinking, well, isn't where you are part of Philadelphia? Yeah, this is metropolitan Philadelphia. That meaning Germantown was annexed to Penn's Philadelphia in 1854 through an act called the Act of Consolidation that united 9 distinct boroughs into what we know of today as metropolitan Philadelphia. But at this time, 1793, Philadelphia was 7 miles away in what we call today Center City, Penn's Philadelphia. So they say Washington fled up here to Germantown from the 16th to the 30th. They also record that he did meet with his cabinet here, and together they conducted national business that addressed issues of foreign policy. What was happening? What was going on politically at this time that, Washington had to meet with his cabinet up here in Germantown and deal with? Okay? Yeah, for us to really look at that, we got to bring in another character into this story, a man named Stephen Girard. Very significant historic figure in U.S. history. Many people may not know the fullness of this man's actions, though. Okay? Stephen Girard, he arrived in Philadelphia in 1776. For about the past 10 years prior to his arrival here, he acted as a French privateer or French pirate who ran ships between New Orleans and Haiti, transporting enslaved Africans, sugar, rum, and cotton primarily. Okay? He arrived in 1776, met a shipbuilder's daughter, quickly married her after the shipbuilder mysteriously died. Critical look at history would really make us think it was beyond coincidence that Girard arrived in 1776, by happenstance. More than likely, he was an agent provocateur, operating for the House of Lorraine within the Kingdom of France. It was the House of Lorraine who was sponsoring the American Revolution through negotiations with Ben Franklin. The strongest evidence pointing to this is the status and position of the Girard family as a whole held throughout the overthrow of the Frank Kingdom and the establishment of the French Republic. And to finance the War of Independence, Bank of North America was established. It was supposed to be a private national bank. Okay, and this actually served as the United States' first central bank. It was organized by Alexander Hamilton and executed by Superintendent of Finance Robert Morris. Original charter was going to be a disbursement of 1,000 shares at $400 each, and Robert Morris procured the greatest amount of those shares, 63%, with a loan from French financiers. 1783, the U.S. gained its independence from Great Britain in the Treaty of Paris. Both the emerging federal government and the original 13 states heavily indebted to French financiers who sponsored the Sons of Liberty and the Founding Fathers. 1784, because the Bank of North America was a de facto central bank, but privately owned, there was a lot of political opposition to it, Several Founding Fathers, including Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, they were like, this isn't really good for national sovereignty. Also, kind of became apparent, like the original financial structure, the way the stock versus debt ratio was set up, wasn't going to leave the U.S. in a position where they could pay off the war debt as well as fund a growing nation, And it's really set the stage for about a decade of intense debate as far as how the financial sovereignty of the nation was going to unfold. Meanwhile, in 1784, Stephen Girard initiates one of the earliest direct contacts between the United States and China. Okay, he establishes a U.S. Canton Delta trade link. Okay, and well, from the Americas. He was bringing silver that he was pirating in the Caribbean, as well as pelts from the mainland. From Asia, he was bringing back opium, primarily opium and tea. But we know that GIRARD was heavily involved in the slave trade, so there may have been slaves involved in that trade as well. 1789, the French Revolution began, okay? And basically what that involved was the House of Lorraine sponsoring the overthrow of the Kingdom of France and the House of Bourbon, whose kings wore the crown. We're not going to get all deep into this. We do explore the United States' role in the overthrow of the House of Bourbon and the establishment of the French Republic in Free Your Mind and Your Mind Will Follow. So I definitely recommend you check that out, if you want more details, specifically through the Society of the Cincinnati. Very important order in the United States who has a hidden hand in a lot of this. So GIRARD's wealth dramatically increased in 1790 when he had his wife committed to Pennsylvania hospital as an incurable lunatic. Okay, she was under the care of a Dr. Benjamin Rush. I want you to remember that. Okay, what happened is, as a result of his wife Mary Lum being institutionalized, he became the custodian of the Lum estates. He made a lot of power move with this money, and yeah, it was real bizarre too, because I'm saying immediately after Lum got institutionalized, he brought mistresses in the house, So fast forward to 1791, you got the first bank of the United States formed, another national bank, chartered for a term of 20 years. So the term was supposed to set to expire in 1811. The bank's branches were all located in port cities, favorable to merchants. The plan for this first bank of the United States was to have the federal government assume Revolutionary War debt of all the states, pay off the war debt, raise money for a new government, and establish a national bank and create a common currency for the nation. Also in this year, 1791, you have a Haitian revolution jumping off, sponsored by the House of Lorraine, to mirror what was happening in France on the island of Haiti. GIRARD, again, he made a lot of money on this event, because when the uprising occurred in the capital city, Le Cap, a lot of the landowners wanted to escape and get off the island with their wealth and with their plundered goods. So GIRARD said, hey, I'm going to send a ship. I got a ship there. Put your plunder on it. I got another ship coming that's going to pick y'all up. Yeah, he never picked them up. He just took their plunder and left them there. And the landowners were massacred. Estimated $50,000 worth of valuables in that time, which is, several millions worth of plunder in today's value. Yeah, took that and invested in these China-American trade routes. He also took some of that money and invested in the first bank of the United States. Very important. 1793, the French Republic is established. Louis XVI is beheaded. The GIRARD family in France, big players in this, in the establishment of the French Republic. The Reign of Terror starts in March. Tens of thousands of opponents of the Republic, or ones who were loyal to the king, beheaded. And the primary political faction who, if you would say who was responsible for the Reign of Terror in France, you would call them the Jacobins, okay? So now, this newly formed French Republic, them declared war on all kingdoms, okay? And that included the Kingdom of Great Britain. And so, that same year, 1 month later in February, French Republic goes to war against Great Britain. Washington, here in the U.S., Washington, he kind of took what you would call an America First policy, even though the new nation owed a huge debt to the newly formed French Republic, and even though Great Britain was a colonial oppressor, Washington wanted the U.S. to remain neutral in the war with Europe, that was bubbling in Europe, because the reality was Great Britain was still a significant trade partner, and the new nation was already in debt, struggling to get out, and hadn't fully healed the wounds of the Revolutionary War. So yeah, he wanted to avoid it for them reasons, but also he felt like the treaty with France was for defensive, not offensive battles. So April 22nd, Washington officially proclaimed neutrality. Okay? Then you had what's called the Citizen Genet affair. So Citizen Genet, that's what they call the affair. The dude's name was Edmond Charles Genet, and he served as a French minister of the U.S. for about a year, 1793, 1794. And the French gave him a serious mission. He was supposed to obtain advance payments on the debts the U.S. owed the French Republic, to negotiate a commercial treaty that allowed French ships access to U.S. ports, but denied British ships access to U.S. ports. And he wanted to also enforce the French Alliance Treaty of 1778, which would allow for attacks on British merchant ships that were in U.S. territory. Okay? This man, instead of even, he was an ambassador. Instead of coming in, presenting himself directly to the head of state first, he violated all international protocol. The man went straight to South Carolina, hired some pirate men, started raiding British ships, started plundering British goods, basically creating an international incident that was hopefully going to have the United States go to war with Great Britain. He was summoned to the capital, which again at this time was Philadelphia. He arrived here in May. But again, before meeting with Washington, he first met with Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson, he was down with this. Thomas Jefferson supported Genet. He was the one arguing that the U.S. should support the newly formed French Republic, And there is evidence to suggest that John Adams, the second president, felt that Jefferson conspired with Genet and GIRARD to create what we would call America's first Plandemic. Okay? So after Jefferson met with Genet, he went to Washington, was like, look, we should support the French. Washington reaffirmed neutrality, right? He demanded Genet stop his privateering, return all the seized British goods, He wasn't having it. So what happens? In June of that year, the reign of terror that was jumping off in France jumped off in Haiti. And there was another round of massacres, and that caused a mass exodus to occur from the island. So now this time, remember the first time, GIRARD didn't take people and just plundered, he took goods. This time, GIRARD did transport people, up to 10,000. They went between two ports, New Orleans and Philadelphia. Okay? And this is what started the first Plandemic, the yellow fever epidemic of 1793. Yeah, because the numbers is funny. You read some accounts, they'll say 2,000. You read some accounts, it'll say at least 3,000. So who knows how many people Stephen GIRARD took from Haiti to Philadelphia. But from June to August, we'll say at least 2,000 to 3,000 were brought. Okay? And these people were crowded in makeshift hovels near GIRARD's property on Dock Street, which is near the Delaware River, again in Penn's, Philadelphia. It was real squalid, and different ones was infected with yellow fever. So now, yellow fever is also known as black vomit disease. It's a terrifying illness caused by a parasite that's transmitted by mosquitoes. But they didn't know that at that time. That parasite attacks the liver. It causes jaundice, causes people to turn yellow. That's why it's called yellow fever. Parasite also causes internal bleeding, right? And blood to accumulate, gastrointestinal tract. And that's where you get the name black vomit, because people tend to spit up blood, okay? So again, this thing was transferred by mosquito, but they didn't know that. So now, created pandemonium and, mad drama within the city. It was a crisis. Approximately 20,000 people left the city. City had, at that time, only had 50,000 residents. So almost half, more than a third of the population fled, okay? And those who fled were the ones who could afford to. The affluent, the merchants, those who had money. Those who remained were the poor and the needy. And they tended to self-quarantine and stay inside. The only ones that would come out were the ones who had come on the ships that GIRARD brought. The refugees from Haiti that GIRARD brought were the only ones who would roam the streets freely because they already felt that they had a certain level of immunity to yellow fever. So the governor and the mayor, okay, Governor Mifflin, he was the governor at this time. Yeah, they was doing their best to clean up. They set up travel bans. All ships coming from the Caribbean, no more could come in. And they set up a crisis committee to address what was going on. And they thought the best approach would be to create a hospital. And of course, the head of the committee was Stephen Girard. So, right, Stephen Girard created the problem of the yellow fever epidemic, and then he created questionable self-serving responses. First and foremost, seems like he used this as an opportunity to rebrand himself as a philanthropic lover of humanity. You got to remember, Girard's reputation at this time was pretty grimy. His fortune was made, through smuggling, enslavement, okay, bribery. The dude was grimy. He owned plantations in Louisiana, right? He's a grimy dude, but he used this as an opportunity to rebrand himself. That crisis committee that I told you was formed, in their minutes, he's, presented as this glowing volunteer who stepped up and offered all these voluntary services. He bigged himself up throughout it all, But, I was always taught self-praise is no praise at all, you know. But you had these first-hand accounts of Girard himself going to the hospital at Bush Hill in Fairmount, that was today the Fairmount section, stepping up with all these heroic acts, I even saw one of the diseased discharge the contents of his stomach upon him. What did Girard do? He wiped the patient's cloth, comforted him, arranged the bed, and inspired him with courage by renewing in him the hope that he should recover. From him he went to another, that vomited offensive matter that would have disheartened any other than this wonderful man. Oh, you who pretend to philanthropy, reflect upon this indefatigable Girard. Take him for your model and profit by his lessons. Yeah, so that was a Dr. Jean Devasey. That was Dr. Jean Devasey, his first hand account of Girard, And again, like if you read biographical accounts of it, he's likened to a soldier on the battlefield, brave and gallant, right? And ushistory.org explains it this way. So the second goal Girard appeared to have, with this Plandemic, was to create a market for his opioid. To do this, he coordinated with a guy named Dr. Benjamin Rush. This Benjamin Rush, a complex character. He's a son of liberty, a founding father. He signed Declaration of Independence. But him and George Washington, they didn't bang. They didn't get down with each other. He more or less snitched on George Washington during the War of Independence. He wrote all these letters to Patrick Henry, questioning Washington's leadership, questioning his ability to lead and administrate and organize. And Patrick Henry showed George Washington. So, Washington showed mercy on him. He just let him resign as opposed to fire him, So at that point, Rush left military life, became professor of chemistry and medicine at University of Pennsylvania. And he had this really bizarre approach to medicine, which he called heroic medicine. It was also known as depletion therapy. It involved bloodletting. He thought bloodletting or depleting blood was the best approach to making someone well. And he wouldn't let out a little blood, but a copious amount, quarts, And he also advocated mercury laxatives that he called Dr. Rush's thunderclappers, which was basically jalapeno peppers and mercury in a carrier that he would either give in enema form or have the person ingest orally. And that was his heroic medicine. Okay. So of course that is could you imagine taking mercury and pepper enemas? Yeah, you would need something to ease the pain. And so that's where Girard's opioids came in. And that was Rush's heroic medicine. He writes, I found bleeding to be useful, not only in cases where the pulse was full and quick, but where it was slow and tense. I have bled twice in many, and in one acute case 4 times, with the happiest effect. I consider intrepidity in the use of the lancet at present to be necessary, as it is in the use of mercury and jalap in this insidious and ferocious disease. So the reality was, as long as Rush incorporated opium, GIRARD turned a blind eye to his heroic medicine and his depletion therapy. You do whatever you want. And Rush, like we hear some today saying vaccinate everyone. Rush was crazy with his thing, you know? On one occasion, when Rush was addressing several hundred Philadelphians in Kensington, someone yelled out at him, "What? Should we bleed and purge everyone?" And Rush shouted back, "Yes, bleed and purge all of Kensington." So look, from August to November, this man saw 100 patients a day, they say. And most were not heroic enough to survive. Okay? And many of his colleagues wondered if he was killing more people than he was saving. You know? The same dude, Dr. Devese, who applauded and lauded GIRARD, he said of him, "It is a scourge more fatal to the humankind than the plague itself would be." So, yeah, eventually they did shut down Benjamin Rush's heroic medicine in 1793, you know? But it wasn't until after 4,044 people died. And the turning point was when Caspar Wistar caught yellow fever and was under the care of Dr. Rush. And he barely survived. And he did recover. And he spoke up. Rush was removed from the Pennsylvania hospital, New Penn. And from that point, Caspar Wistar's use of vaccines and vaccinations became the focus of University of Pennsylvania's preventative and public health policy from that point on. And so we do have to say that we could see right here with GIRARD's opium, Wistar's vaccines, Rush's mercury thunderclappers, here we have the historic roots of today's modern biomedical nightmare, you know, coming out of UPenn and in its affiliate institute, the Wistar Institute. Wistar Institute was founded in the 1800s by one of Caspar Wistar's descendants. We also, before we leave here, we do got to point out that this yellow fever pandemic, it kind of did establish the liberal agenda in U.S. race relations, you know, because Benjamin Rush was also an abolitionist who, right, he didn't advocate for slavery or enslavement, but he had really bizarre views on race. Rush definitely considered and called Negroes savages, you know, but he would say their savagery was due to enslavement and that their mental capacity was equivalent of the European. Rush also felt that, you know, Negroes tended to be greater in spirit and more in touch with God. However, he said dark skin was a curse of God and a form of leprosy that dulled their senses in the real world, and that, hey, this form of leprosy could be cured by bloodletting, also with bleaching with acid. Rush initially thought Negroes were immune to yellow fever, and because most able-bodied people had fled the city, Rush appealed to the Free Black Society in Philadelphia for their labor and their resources and their help. He coordinated with Richard Allen and Absalom Jones of the Free African Society to, you know, rally up ones to serve as nurses and transportation and grave diggers, you know, and they did. And they really helped step up and, you know, help with this thing. But then afterwards, the press painted the free blacks as the creators and the carriers of the yellow fever epidemic. And they were vilified. And they said that they exploited the situation by overcharging for their services and stealing from the dead and stealing from the sick, you know, to the point where Richard Allen, who, you know, Benjamin Rush had coordinated with, he had to write a refutation like, nah, it didn't go down like that, you know. So the third thing GIRARD appeared to use the yellow fever pandemic for was to consolidate his hold on the U.S. financial system. Okay, during the yellow fever pandemic, Philadelphia's stock market had depreciated crazy, you know, as well as the first bank of the United States. So, yeah, GIRARD purchased as much stock as possible between late 1793 and early 1794, becoming a greater stakeholder through it all, you know? The fourth and probably most relevant goal GIRARD appeared to have was to assist Citizen Guinea in his efforts of undermining U.S. sovereignty. Recall the social reality in Philadelphia streets. Out of 50,000 residents, 20,000 escaped. And that was the affluent, influential citizens who could afford the exodus. The poor that remained, they tended to self-quarantine at home. He was terrified. And it's recorded that those who could roam Philadelphia without fear of the plague were the 2,000 to 3,000 Haitian refugees imported by GIRARD. This is relevant because with this black vomit disease, with this yellow fever pandemic, death so heavy in the air, there were still political demonstrations numbering in the thousands of Philadelphia. Protesters were demanding the U.S. support the French Republic against the British. The protesters agitated and were considered a threat to the maintenance of government. Okay? And it's amazing to me how little historic record there is of this event. Most record of it is accounts by John Adams. Okay? And he recalls the scene to Thomas Jefferson in a letter. He says, "You certainly never felt the terrorism excited by Genet in 1793 when 10,000 people in the streets of Philadelphia day after day threatened to drag Washington out of his house and effect a revolution in the government, or compel it to declare war in favor of the French Revolution and against England. The coolest and the firmest minds, even among the Quakers in Philadelphia, have given their opinion to me that nothing but the yellow fever, which removed Dr. Hutchison and Jonathan Dickinson Sargent from this world, could have saved the United States from a total revolution of government. I have no doubt you were fast asleep in philosophical tranquility when 10,000, note he said 10,000, they say GIRARD brought 2,000 to 3,000 refugees, and that these were the only ones who could walk the streets. But here you have recorded that 10,000 people, and perhaps many more, were parading the streets of Philadelphia on the evening of my fast day, when even Governor Mifflin himself thought it was his duty to order a patrol of horse and foot to preserve the peace, when Market Street was as full as man could stand by one another, and even before my door, when some of my domestics in frenzy determined to sacrifice their lives in my defense, when I myself judged it prudent and necessary to order chests of arms from the War Office to be brought through by-lanes and back doors, determined to defend my house at the expense of my life and the lives of the few, very few domestics and friends within it." So you hear this man saying that in the midst of this yellow fever pandemic, looting and massacring and rioting, right, where Mifflin had to step up and defend Washington's home, and he had servants defend, John Adams had servants defending his home, and he himself had to take up arms. It continues, "What think of you of terrorism, Mr. Jefferson? Shall I investigate these causes?" So he's accusing him. He's saying like, yo, I know you was down with this, man. I would give all I am worth for a collection of those circular letters. And he's referring to circular letters among governors of the South who were probably coordinating with Jefferson. The real terrors of both parties have always been, and now are, the fear that they shall lose the elections and consequently the loaves and fishes, and that their antagonists will obtain them. Both parties have excited artificial terrors, and if I were summoned as a witness to say upon oath which party had excited it Machiavellianly the most terror, and which had really felt the most, I cannot give a more sincere answer than in the vulgar style, put 'em in a bag, shake 'em, and then see which comes out first. This is a letter Adams wrote to his wife about the same time period. The anti-federal party, that's this Jeffersonian party, by their ox feasts and their civic feasts. So right, they out there bread and circus, giving them the bread and circus, and giving them, feeding them and giving them toast and shows. Their king killing toast, so like entertainment for killing monarchies. Their perpetual insolence and billing gate against the Batians and governments of Europe. Their everlasting brutality, their everlasting brutal cry of tyrants, despots, combinations against liberty, etc., 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 have probably irritated, offended, and provoked all the crowned heads of Europe at least, and a little more of this indelicacy and indecency, and may involve us in a war with all the world. On the other hand, it is possible the French Republicans may be angry with us for preventing their minister from involving us in war and anarchy. The state is in critical circumstances and have been brought into them by the heat and impatience of the people. If nothing will bring them to consideration, I fear they will suffer severely for their rashness. So he's like, yo, we're in critical state right now, right? And the people are in an impatient and heated state. And if they don't think, they're going to suffer severely for their rashness. The friends of the government have been as blind as its enemies in giving way to the torrent, their great error in suffering public cola to be overborne. So too much into, public rabble rousing, and pains yellow fever to be spread and propagated and applauded as if instead of a distemper, just like a mild sickness, a putrid, malignant, mortal, fatal epidemic. It had been a salubrious shower of blessings from on high. It is reported this luminary is coming to America. I would rather 2 more Ghanaians should arrive. So, he's telling his wife, like, psh, the people are wilding. They can't see that this thing was set up to make them hype, right? That this yellow fever, it's not that deep. They're playing it like it's a malignant, mortal, fatal epidemic, But it really played itself as a blessing because it actually, the way the events rolled out, it actually saved Washington from office, right? So like I said, beyond these accounts, there's little historic record of a 10,000 strong protest in Philadelphia at the height of the yellow fever epidemic. Most historic record connecting a rebellious protest, threatened continuity of government to the Citizen Genet affair is the Whiskey Rebellion, 1794 in western Pennsylvania, right? But it's this often overlooked riot in Philadelphia that caused George Washington to come up here and seek refuge in Germantown, not yellow fever. He came to end this plandemic rioting crisis under the guise of addressing issues of foreign policy. We could look at Washington's timeline, look at his historic timeline to see if what I'm saying adds up. In September, during the height of the plandemic, George Washington was in Washington, D.C., laying the cornerstone for the United States Capitol. He didn't return to Philadelphia until November 9th, and he came to announce the end of the yellow fever epidemic. Like we said, this thing was transmitted by mosquito. And when the first frost came in early November, the so-called epidemic just stopped. Okay? But it was after he arrived in November 9th that these riots must have occurred. 16th, he comes up here to Germantown. They say to remain under quarantine for the yellow fever. So here is the U.S. Park Service plaque for the Germantown White House, also known as the Deschler Morris House. So the plaque reads as such. And so if you take what they have here in writing and you look at this picture, you're to assume that this is the Washington family here at the Deschler Morris house, right? Martha with her 2 grandchildren, the servant, right? And if you read different historical accounts, some will say it's Washington slave Billy Lee, or some will say that it's Washington slave Hercules, right? But no, this is not supposed. It is Washington's family, but they're not supposed to be at the Deschler Morris house. And this man is definitely not George Washington's servant. Okay? Let's use the keys of decoding that are revealed in the Great Mystery Philadelphia and free your mind and your mind will follow to really decipher what's going on in this picture. It is true that the woman and 2 younger people depicted is Martha Washington and her 2 grandchildren. But the way they're depicted is telling you that they're not in Germantown, Pennsylvania. More than likely, they are in Mount Vernon or somewhere near Washington, D.C. They're looking at a map of that region, and The three of them are creating the angles of the federal triangle of Washington. George Washington with his hand at where the U.S. Capitol is on the map. And remember, we said in September, at the height of the Plandemic, Washington was in Washington, D.C., laying the cornerstone for the U.S. Capitol. Martha's granddaughter has her finger where the Washington Monument is. And so she's embodying the constellation Virgo and the star Spica. You can read Free Your Mind and Your Mind Will Follow, where I go into that in depth. Martha herself has her stylus where the White House will be. Okay? Notice that George is leaning on the child, and that the child has his hand on a partially covered globe. That's all symbolic. That represents Washington's needed support of the young French Republic, which was a globalist empire. Okay? That youth is making a 180-degree straight line with the Moor, who is standing behind Martha and his sister. That's the axis of power of the globalists, the young French Republic, and what that man represents. And we're going to go, that axis of power between the young French Republic and this Moor. We're going to decode him a little more, okay? But I just want to show that he is not a slave, okay? You can see by his attire, how he is dressed, his how he is standing, how he's presented. He's not a slave. So this is, George Washington's plantation in Mount Vernon, where you see how his servants are presented. This is a picture of Hercules, who they said, was a dapper servant, okay? But even you could see, though, the style of clothing that Hercules is presented in is still that of a servant, where this man is wearing attire more associated European aristocracy. It's to show you that, he's not the only Moor attired in European aristocracy in Washington's presence, as well as globes. This right here is a depiction of Benjamin Banneker revealing the powers of the Summit Hill to George Washington and Andrew Ellicott. To get the full decoding and decipherment of this photo, of course, you got to go to Free Your Mind, Your Mind Will Follow. We got a whole section on Banneker's Chocolate City. But here you have Moore in the superior position, right? He's standing crowned highest head in the chart. We see that he's revealing the celestial alignment needed to make Washington, D.C. the perfect geomantic city. We could tell that because behind Banneker is a telescope representing his astronomical insight. The globe behind Andrew Ellicott is the celestial sphere. It's not a globe of the earth. It's the celestial sphere. The globe behind George Washington, partially cloaked globe in the first one. So they're both representing globalists in a position of not knowing the geomancy and the geography of this terrain. Benjamin Banneker revealing it to him. When we look at that picture, taken in context with here, we see that this man is a man in the know. He is a man initiated in a Masonic order. We can see by his hand gesture, we'll go into that. And he is the axis of power. He's one pole of the axis of power between the young boy, which represents the young French Republic, and he on the other side. So now we should even say he's in a quincux aspect to Washington's gaze. Washington is not looking at anyone, which says he's in thought within. The man is standing at a 150-degree angle, so he's in Washington's periphery. Quincux angle represents what's in front of your face, but you do not see. Okay? Things that are in your periphery are things that you should be looking at, but aren't paying attention to. It does not have your focus. Things that have your focus tend to be 180 degrees right in front of you. Okay? This man is in Washington's quincux position, which means he's the elephant in the room. It's not being looked at from Washington's point of view. Who is he? He's a French Jacobin, a French black Jacobin. He wasn't a servant. Okay? This pose that he is in, okay, the hand in waistcoat, also known as the hidden hand gesture. At face value, they say it's a pose that denotes manly boldness tempered with modesty. But in code, if to decipher it, hidden hand means it's usually someone who's in the know. Like this person knows what it is. He's in on the program. So during this time period politically, this stance was most associated with French Republic imperialism and Napoleon. Yeah, if you want to know more about who this man represented in history, CLR James, the Black Jacobins, great starting point. But just to affirm to you that this is a hand gesture that means someone who's in the know. This is a Masonic gesture that is known as the sign of the master of the second veil. Okay? So here we are with, them telling us what it is with this Germantown White House. So what actually went on here? There were 4 cabinet meetings between November 16th and 30th of that year. Attending was Thomas Jefferson, who was Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury, Henry Knox, Secretary of War, and Edmund Randolph, who was the Attorney General. Jefferson, he was defending Guinea and encouraging support for the French Republic on the grounds that the French people, not the king, gave support to the Revolutionary War. Jefferson also viewed the proclamation as an infringement on Congress's power to declare war. Hamilton and Knox, they was like, nah, we need to stay neutral, that, hey, it's in the president's duty to preserve peace until Congress declares war. So also the treaty with France, it was for a defensive alliance, not for offensive wars, But the reality is no official decision was made here, And if anything, they agreed to shut Jefferson down, okay? In a subsequent letter, Jefferson wrote to Thomas Pinckney, who was the governor of South Carolina, and probably one of the governors who John Adams was like, yeah, man, I'd like to see your letters. This is one of the letters, right? He said, the yellow fever epidemic, which at that time had given alarm in Philadelphia, became afterward far more destructive than had been apprehended, and continued much longer from the uncommon drought and warmth of the autumn. The first day of this month began the first rains, which had fallen for some. They were copious, and from that moment the disease terminated most suddenly. The inhabitants who had left the city are now all returned, and business going on again as briskly as ever. You have probably heard of the great misunderstanding between Mr. Genet and us. On the meeting of Congress, it will be made public. We have kept it merely personal, convinced his nation will disapprove him. To them, the French, we have with the utmost assurity given every proof of inviolate attachment. So basically, the Plandemic is exposed. They see Guinea was wilding, and now Jefferson is having to wash his hands from him, right? He's leaving him out to dry. So we can see, for real, on that level, the Plandemic backfired, right? Neutrality was maintained and was actually formalized in what they call the Jay Treaty of 1794, which, hey, gave Britain favored nation trading status and really established why the United States and Britain maintained close ties, for the next 100 or so years. Thomas Jefferson, he resigned as Secretary of State in 1794, kind of as fallout from this. And this backlash also propelled John Adams, a founding father who had strong ties with Great Britain, to the presidency. He became the second president after George Washington. Also, 1796 jumped off what's known as the quasi-war with France, where, because of our neutrality, United States merchants and French merchants engaged in war in the Caribbean and South Atlantic from, 1796 to 1800. It was called a quasi-war because it was undeclared, but it was 4 years of U.S. and France pirating one another. And the French Republic forces that were, heading it, Napoleon Bonaparte. So, we got to fast forward what was going on in Haiti at this point. The Jacobins of Haiti felt betrayed by the French Republic. Were actually fighting against Napoleon at this point. Kind of like how the U.S. was like, hold up, France, y'all kind of wilding, like we was with you for a minute, but same thing happened in Haiti, right? So French forces in the Caribbean were getting overextended. They couldn't continue to fight against Toussaint Louverture in Haiti and United States. So the French Republic basically had to surrender to U.S. naval and British forces. And they did so with what's known as the Convention of 1800, which occurred September 30th of that year. That treaty, it affirmed U.S. neutrality in land and sea. It ended the alliance with France that was set in the Treaty of Paris, and it canceled the $20 million war debt the United States owed France. But you think GIRARD and them boys was just going to let that go? Nah, this is what happened. April 1802, Haiti in Haiti. Napoleon was able to consolidate his forces since he wasn't fighting the U.S. no more, and he took it to Louverture. So Louverture agreed to surrender in May of 1802. He was promised his freedom if he agreed to integrate their forces into the French army. Under the terms of the agreement, Louverture was going to be able to keep his freedom, but he was betrayed by Napoleon with the help of GIRARD. They imprisoned him. GIRARD shipped Louverture back to France, where he died in prison. Okay? Louverture had accumulated a lot of wealth. What today's value would be $6 to $8 million. Okay? GIRARD confiscated all of that. And with it, in 1804, he used the plundered wealth from Haiti to become the majority stakeholder of the First Bank of the United States. How did it roll out from there? He used his wealth to get Thomas Jefferson in as the third president, right? Jefferson begins undermining U.S. leverage on the international stage. The most dramatic act was the Embargo Act of 1807, where Jefferson put a halt to all trade, right? It was very retaliatory against Great Britain. This set the stage for the War of 1812 against Great Britain. Why is that significant? In 1811, the charter for the First Bank of the United States expired. And Stephen Girard basically bought all U.S. debt, bought the building of the First Bank of the United States, reopened it as Girard Bank, and by doing so, he became the one individual in history to own the country, to own all U.S. debt. And he bankrolled the U.S. in the War of 1812. And I'm not even going to get into the economic aftermath of all of that. That's for y'all to research. But I do want to point out that these are the same boys working with the same tactics. One of the last things Napoleon Bonaparte, Stephen Girard's partner in crime, the last things he was quoted as saying is, "China is a sleeping giant. Let her sleep, for when she wakes, she will move the world." Yeah, some food for thought, food for thought. This 2020 and 2020 hindsight.
Rain sometimes, like rain sometimes. Make your mind in red 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 sometimes. Oh, oh, yeah. And then we act like everything is alright. That's not what your true soul testifies. The eyelid red sometimes. The eyelids red sometimes. Red sometimes. Red sometimes.